This is a two-part talk. Today, I'm going to give you my river-friendly yards talk, which is a lot of information about why river-friendly yards are important. So, a little bit about what's the problem we're trying to fix with the river-friendly yard, and then what is a river-friendly yard. And then next week, we're going to dive into plants. And so I've heard a lot of you discussing the lists of invasives that are in the booklet there and all the things that are in your yard. And I sympathize with you because my husband and I just moved in the fall and we have everything in that booklet. So we have lots of work to do. So we'll kind of dive into what are some alternatives to those plants, what are considerations that you need to think about when you're creating a landscape in your yard, and what are some resources you can lean on. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. I am a landscape architect by training. I have my bachelor's in landscape architecture from Temple University. And I have done work, I used to have a private practice doing landscape design. I've also previously was in more of an educational role, working for the Watershed Stewards Academy over in Anne Arundel County. Most recently, before I came to Shore Rivers, my husband and I ran a farm, ran an organic regenerative farm in Centerville, and my husband was a forester. He's a licensed professional forester, and he and I worked for many years doing invasive species eradication and forest stewardship. So I have lots of hands-on experience with getting rid of the bad guys. And now I work for Shore Rivers. So
you're still working with bad guys?
Yes. So Shore Rivers, if you're not familiar with us as an organization, we are your riverkeeper organization. So we cover the Choptank, Miles, Wye, Eastern Bay, Chester, and Sassafras River watersheds. And each of those rivers has a riverkeeper. That riverkeeper is the voice of the river. They engage in a lot of advocacy efforts on behalf of the river, whether that's with local government or state government, and sometimes even the federal government. The riverkeeper has the power to bring suit on behalf of the river if they need to. And they are kind of at the center of our organization of about 30 full-time staff. And we're organized in these departments. Our agriculture and restoration department is primarily dealing with our farmers. So farmers tend to get a bad rap in the water quality world. They get a lot of fingers pointed at them for being a pollution source. And at Shore Rivers, we think it's really important to take a collaborative approach. So our attitude is that we want to work with farmers and not against farmers. We have a robust staff that is doing just that, going out and helping farmers to find ways to not only have a booming crop on their field and really productive lands, but doing that in ways that are protecting our waterways from the runoff. And of course, that protects the farmers' soils, which is their most precious resource. We also have an education department. How many people are aware of the environmental literacy graduation requirement in the state of Maryland? Anybody know about that?
I was a teacher.
Okay. So here in the state of Maryland, we have something called an environmental literacy requirement for graduation. And students engage with a variety of different curriculum as they move through their 12 years in our school system. Everything from wire trees, terrific, to learning about monarch butterflies, and then actually things about sturgeon and oysters. So the problem with that mandate, which is very important, and I applaud the state of Maryland for being so forward-thinking in it, is that it is an unfunded mandate. So our school systems are told that our kids need to learn these things, but they are not provided any additional resources in order to provide those learning opportunities. And one thing that they have to have is something called a meaningful watershed experience. which is they're getting outside in nature and connecting with the resource so that they can actually experience it and know why we should protect this precious thing that we have, these beautiful rivers that we have. And so our education department provides those meaningful watershed experiences to students on the Eastern Shore. They provide curriculum to teachers. They help schools get Green School certified. And so they are doing all that through grant funding at no cost to our school systems. Our community engagement department, I am one of the 3 staff in our community engagement department. I do things like this. I also manage our Tree the Shore program, which Lynn alluded to earlier, and I'll talk a little bit about later, and our River Friendly Yards program. And then of course I mentioned our river keepers, and then of course we have to have the people that keep the lights on, and that's our development and finance and operations department. So what is the problem? Why do we need river friendly yards? Well, we have pollution sources that are fouling our waterways. One of the biggest ones is agricultural runoff. That's about 60% of our watershed is farmland. And when not properly protected, when that soil washes off of the field and into the nearest creek or stream or river, it's bringing with it nutrients. And while nutrients are very valuable on the land, when they hit the water, they become pollution. Another source is wastewater. So that's our sewers, our septic systems, and our municipal and industrial discharge. This is an example of what's called a combined sewer overflow. So some of our older towns still have, while they are working to upgrade this, they do still have some antiquated sewer systems where in a rain event, you can get sewer overflow going into the storm drains, which means it's then spilling out into the rivers. Septic systems that are older or are failing, they can create that leachate that is full of nitrogen and becomes a pollution source. Our municipal systems have been steadily upgraded, so our wastewater treatment plants have better technology than they ever have before, and that's really helpful. But these septic systems still continue to be a bit of an issue. And then finally, we have urban and residential runoff. So this is all of the water that hits our roof, our sidewalks, our streets, our driveways, any place that is impervious, so surface that water cannot penetrate and percolate down through. When water hits those surfaces and it sheet flows, it brings whatever's there with it. So if it's hitting your lawn, it's bringing the fertilizer that was on the lawn. If it's hitting your roof, it's bringing the air pollution that has settled on your roof. We have somebody joining us. We have someone online. Welcome, Donna. And so also what's happening is as it runs across hot surfaces in the summertime, that water warms up. And when it hits that nearest stream, it's bringing that warm water into the stream. And that is very disruptive to the little creatures that make their habitat in those small streams. They need that cooler water temperature in order to thrive. And one thing, just going back, that I neglected to mention is that with our storm drain systems, I think there is a somewhat common misnomer that when the water goes down into that storm drain, that it's being treated somewhere. And that is not the case. It's not going to our sewage treatment plant. It's actually being piped to the absolute closest stream that the engineer who designed it could find, because that was the most efficient and cost-effective way to get water away. And so when that happens, you're kind of concentrating that water flow into that stream and into a pipe and into that creek. Usually it's coming out in that creek at a great velocity, which causes a lot of erosion in the stream. And you can go to some older streams and find that they're tremendously in size, like where they used to have connection to a floodplain, where that stream could kind of overflow its banks. They're way, like some of them I could stand in and not reach the top, because that great velocity of flow has been carving out the stream bed over time. And when it does that, and that sediment that it carves out flows down the stream with the water, the nutrients that are bound up in that sediment become available and they become pollution. Okay, so what are these impacts of the water pollution that we just mentioned? Excess nutrients lead to algal blooms and low oxygen levels. So that's the dead zone that we hear about in the middle of the bay, that's reported on yearly. When you have low oxygen levels, the animals that want to live in those places no longer can. The sediment causes poor water clarity and poor light penetration. So when you think about those underwater grasses, the bay grasses, also called submerged aquatic vegetation or SAVs, they need light. And there's lots of things that live in those grasses. So when the grasses die off, they lose their habitat. And then bacteria. So of course we love to recreate on our waterways. Swimming and shellfish harvesting restrictions come into play sometimes because of high bacteria counts. Shore Rivers does have our Swimmable Shore Rivers program that will be starting up just in a few weeks, where we're going out with volunteers and we're taking bacteria samples at different publicly accessible places around our waterways and reporting on that data every Friday so you know whether or not it's safe to get into the river. As we experience sea level rise and more intense rain events, we do see increased runoff and shoreline erosion, which will then jeopardize a lot of our structures and those wastewater treatment systems, which are usually placed close to a waterway because they need a place to discharge that clean effluent after it's finished treating. So that's all the bad news. That's all the bad news we're going to talk about today. Now we're going to talk about what we can do. And that is we can make small solutions in our own little piece of the rock that we control. So it can be intimidating that this is such a big problem. But you know, we all can do a little something. And I love this quote, "No snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible." So we're all the snowflakes. We've all been part of the avalanche, unwittingly, unknowingly. None of us actually wants to pollute our river or our waterways. But you know, knowledge is power. And so we can all become little drops of water to reduce that flood, or we can absorb our drops of water to reduce that flood. So, one of the biggest things we can do is have less lawn. So this is our Sassafras Riverkeeper, Zach Kelleher, and he's dressed up for the infamous Chestertown Tea Party in the garb that was of fashion when lawns became fashionable. And we don't dress like that anymore, and yet lawns are still the default landscape. They are still a status symbol of just a well manicured and maintained landscape. They came into fashion first out of necessity, so out of security. Literally, you wanted to be able to see who would be storming the castle, right? So you cleared that land around your structures that you wanted to be able to defend. And then, you know, that wasn't really necessary anymore. We became a more civilized society. So then they became a status symbol because back at that time, we didn't have lawnmowers, we didn't have weed whackers, we had people. And so if you could afford humans to cut your lawn for you with shears, then you were wealthy. That was a sign of great social status. And that has just remained ever since. Today, We are farming 1.3 million acres of turf in Maryland. We spend $5 billion a year to do that, and that doesn't include the volunteer labor that your children or grandchildren are going out and doing on their own. 86 million pounds of nitrogen lawn fertilizer are applied every year, which is 44% of the state's total fertilizer sold. So that is going to lawns. So if we just stopped doing that, if we stopped putting fertilizer on our lawns, we could meet up to 98% of each county's nitrogen reduction goals. So what's the alternative? This is a term, low impact landscaping, that was actually coined in our state legislature back in 2022, I believe, when there was a law passed saying that homeowners associations can no longer restrict residents from having these low impact landscapes, which are a series of practices that I'm going to go through. Yes.
We just put that into our architectural guidelines, that this was an okay thing to do.
Oh, excellent.
It took me 8 years to get that done.
Persistence pays off.
Yes.
Well done. So these are techniques that conserve water, they lower maintenance costs, they provide pollution prevention, and they provide habitat for wildlife. And as you can see in these photos, they don't have to look messy, they don't have to look wild, they don't have to be tall, they can be beautiful. This center picture is taken at Mount Cuba Botanical Gardens in Delaware. Show of hands, has anybody been to Mount Cuba? Excellent.
We
If you
just
haven't, I highly recommend. It's a lovely place to go. It's a former DuPont estate turned into a public garden, except for its unique feature is that all of the plants at this estate are native plants. And so they have a very, very grand manor house there with very formal gardens, and every plant in those formal gardens is a native plant. And so the common perception when we hear native plant is tall, weedy, messy, wild, and it doesn't have to be that way if you choose the right plants, which we're going to talk a lot about next week. So let's start close up to the building. One thing you can do is put in a rain barrel or a cistern. So I think probably everybody is aware of what a rain barrel is. They've been around for a while. Usually they hold between 30 and 55 gallons of water, which is not a lot of water depending on the size of your roof. So they capture that first flush of water that comes off the roof. That's the water that is most likely to be carrying pollution with it. You don't want to spray that water on your vegetable garden because it's running across your asphalt shingles and has lots of air pollution in it. So, but you can release it into a conservation landscape, which is basically a lovely garden bed that's full of thirsty native plants.
So is that a cistern on the left?
Yes.
Oh,
So
I've never seen that.
So a cistern is a rain barrel on steroids. So this one that's pictured can hold 250 gallons of water. So, you know, much more effective at capturing a larger section of roof. And then it will slowly release that water after the rain event is over into the landscape. And it sort of captures that water and detains it and then lets it out at a moderate flow so that you don't have that runoff. It's more likely to soak down into the ground. And then on the right, I have a picture of a partially vegetated driveway, which probably in the 1940s was just called a driveway. Like, that's what they looked like. Some of you may remember that. And so somewhere in time, we stopped building our driveways like that, and now they're just these giant expanses of concrete or asphalt. So removing some of that and putting in some vegetation where your tires aren't likely to run over it can be really helpful to have some pervious surface, so places where water can soak in. process I want to tell you about is a rain garden, or as I like to say, a garden with a job. So to the untrained eye, a rain garden looks like any other landscape bed. It's full of plants, it looks beautiful, except it has a very technical construction to it. First, it needs to have a safe place for water to enter the garden, so that water is coming in a controlled manner. It's not gushing in and causing a lot of erosion. It needs to have the soil usually replaced. Sometimes if you have really sandy soils, you don't need to replace your soil, but usually what they'll do is dig out the native soil and put in what's called constructed soil. And that's a very specific ratio of compost and sand. And what that does is create lots of pore space that will hold water so that it can then perk down into the water table. And also it's fast draining. Above that soil, you want to have some ponding space, usually about 6 inches. So that's the space between the soil on the ground and then the kind of berm around the rain garden. And so the water can actually pond there for a short period of time before it soaks down into the garden. And then of course we have the berm that makes that possible. And finally, we have a safe way for water to exit that rain garden in larger storms. So typically a rain garden is going to be sized to take in the amount of water that's being directed to it in a 2-inch rain. We get much larger storms than that these days. And so when that happens, you want to have a way for that water to then flow out of the rain garden and sheet away without undermining the structural integrity of the garden itself. It's very important that you consult with somebody who knows how to design and install these rain gardens rather than just going out and digging one yourself, for 2 reasons. One, if you don't have the soils that are appropriate for actually allowing that water to perk down into the ground in no more than 72 hours, what you have is not a rain garden, but a pond. And that can become problematic. That's when you start to hear about mosquito issues, because over 72 hours, now you've created a habitat that mosquitoes can lay their eggs and they can hatch. Also, the other reason you want to consult with a professional is that it needs to be sized appropriately for the watershed that it is draining. A bioswale is basically, instead of being a swale that's just meant to get water carried away as quickly as possible, it's more like a linear rain garden. So instead of just being turf grass, it's typically planted with deep-rooted native plants that are going to soak that water down. It also is going to have that constructed soil underneath of the structural soil underneath of the plants rather than the native soils. And it's also going to have a series of what's called check dams. And so that creates along the swale a series of cells. So the water flows into the top of the swale, it's able to pond up, hopefully soak down. And then if it's a lot of water, when it ponds up so far, it safely flows over that check dam into the next cell, which then fills up, and so on and so on. So I keep mentioning native plants. They are essential to all of these practices for a few reasons. One, they provide essential habitat for birds and pollinators. 2, they improve water quality because they have very deep roots. So if you were to put petunias and rose bushes in these practices, they're not going to have the same effect of drawing that water down. They may not be able to withstand the temporary ponding of water in a rain garden. And then also they have a placemaking and mental health benefit. So when we look around our landscape, there are certain species that make sense. They are of a place. Think of our white oak. Think of the loblolly pines. These are things we expect to see on the Eastern Shore. If we saw a palmetto tree, it would be weird. It doesn't belong here. It doesn't evoke that sense of place. And that is when we have this like lush green environment, it also is very impactful to our mental health. So lots of studies have shown that if you grow up on a street that is devoid of trees and green spaces, that it has a very big impact on your physical and mental health in comparison to somebody who's on a street that has that nice tree canopy and green spaces. It lowers our blood pressure, it slows us down, it makes us feel calmer. Putting these plants in the ground also represent hope in action. It's an actual thing that you can do and feel like you did something. No one can do everything, but we all can do something, and that's really important. As far as the habitat for birds, I want to, how many people have heard of Doug Tallamy? Anybody? Okay, just a couple people. Doug Tallamy is an entomologist, so he studies insects at the University of Delaware, and he's been studying the relationship between insects and birds and native plants for many, many years. And his question was, like, why are we having these great losses in population of our insects? And he found that it was because insects are specialists. They can't just reproduce on any old plant. They have co-evolved with these plants that are indigenous to this area for millions of years. And when they were doing that co-evolving, they created adaptations that made them able to eat those plants without dying, or be able to lay their eggs on those plants, which would then be able to eat those plants. And that was really important for the population of the insects. And so if you take away the plants that the insects co-evolved with, their populations crash. And so as we have created our developed spaces, in some cases we've done a great job of putting landscaping back in, but a lot of times that landscaping, most of the times that landscaping, are not things that are from here. And so the insects can't make any use of it. And the other link in that chain is the birds. So we are losing our songbird populations at a dramatic rate. Songbirds are dependent on those insects. How many people have a bird feeder in your backyard? Right? Which is fantastic. It's a really great resource for birds in the wintertime when they're looking for food. But when birds this time of year are raising their babies, they are wholly dependent upon insects. It takes a mama chickadee thousands of caterpillars to raise one clutch of baby birds. And so if you don't have those native plants that are playing host to those insects, she can't raise her young. So we've started to see these linkages, and Dr. Tallamy found that in any one little backyard, the tipping point is if you have less than 70% native plants. So once you get under that, you can't really support a mama bird. And if she can string together a few yards that have native plants, then she's got habitat. She can raise those babies. So he's written several books talking about this. He's an excellent speaker. If you see an opportunity to see him speak, I highly recommend it. He's very engaging, very witty. He has gorgeous slides, lots of photographs of birds and crazy looking insects up really close.
You can also find him on YouTube. Because he gives lots of presentations all over the country.
Yes. So this page is from the River Friendly Yards book. Many of you found this at the beginning of the class when we were waiting for things to get started. These are some commonly planted invasive plants that are just ubiquitous in our landscape. So the things that we put back in when we started developing, I mean, Japanese barberry is like everywhere. Nandina is everywhere. English ivy is everywhere. These are things that are really common in our developed landscapes now, and they're providing no habitat value to the birds and the bugs that are from here.
Now, aren't some of those actually on the list in Maryland as invasive species that you should not be planting?
Yes, so we do in Maryland have a list of invasive plants, and the law actually just changed last year. They're going to be changing. It used to be that you could sell these plants, you could plant these plants, but they had to come with a warning, which is sort of dumb. And so now it's changing that you won't be able to buy these plants, but it's going to take some time. I actually sit on the Invasive Plant Advisory Council, and we are going right now through the process of creating the rubric of scoring a plant to determine whether or not it should be included on the list. All of this stuff is going to end up on the list.
It's a hard argument with some people in our community organizations too, because, oh, Gordon, she looks so pretty, but it serves no purpose. Well,
Right.
that's okay, it's pretty, but no, it's not okay.
Well, in some cases, yes, there are plants that are pretty but serve no ecological purpose. In the case of these plants, not only do they not serve an ecological purpose, but they're actually very damaging to our ecological system. So these are plants that readily spread out into our natural areas where we really need to have intact ecosystems that are made up of the plants that came from here. Yes.
Can you explain like a butterfly bush? It doesn't spread, it gets tons of pollinators.
They do spread. They do spread terribly. Yes. I had, when I lived in Pennsylvania, I had a butterfly bush in my backyard that was there when I bought the house. And every summer I would be yanking all of its seedlings up out of the area around my patio where it was spreading. They spread terribly.
I didn't think about that because we cut.
Exactly. So that is always what I hear. Well, it doesn't spread in my yard. Well, I spent lots of years with my husband out in the woods when we had landowners who wanted to steward their property, and we were cleaning these things up. And the way they would end up there is because the birds would move them there. They would eat them in your yard, and then they would hydroseed them into the woods. And so, and so the other thing I hear is, well, it's providing food for the birds. Not really. So the analogy I like to use is if you gave your kids a bag of Doritos for dinner, they would fill their belly, they might be satisfied, but they would not be getting the nutrition that they need to grow and thrive. And so that is the same with these plants. Yes, animals will eat them when there's nothing else to eat because they're desperate, but they need very specific amino acids and different compounds in their food in order to A, survive the winter, or B, migrate. My daughter is a wildlife biologist, and she said that when birds migrate, it's like a human running a marathon every single day with 0 body fat. It's a Herculean feat. And so when they stop to rest and they don't find the food source that provides them those essential things that their little body needs in order to keep that going, ultimately they fail. So that's why it's really important to, A, get rid of these things because they're actively harming the natural spaces that we have left. And then B, replace them with things that actually can create some natural spaces in our own backyards that these animals can utilize to survive.
Can I ask a question? So we bought the property, and I think if it blooms white and was not native, they planted it. So we're in the process of trying to get rid of some of those things. But what we have is this gorgeous crop of English ivy that is climbing up the lollies at a rate that I can't keep up with.
Like 2 acres of it.
Yeah,
And the question is how, so I guess we could go in with some nasty pesticide, okay, so that's not gonna work, and we have a lot of, native plants. For some reason, we have so much devil's walking stick that I'm a little concerned that we have so much of it, but I had to wipe that out if I were to bring in like a bush hog to get rid of, so how do you,
there is a native and a non-native devil's walking stick, so I would encourage you to key that out, like look up
oh, I'll have to check that out.
how to tell them apart, and then just make sure that what you're carefully preserving actually is.
I'm really not carefully preserving, I'm just not fighting it.
But so I'm gonna give you a little tip on removing English ivy. So herbicide is really ineffective on English ivy because it has such a thick, waxy leaf surface, what's called a cuticle on a leaf. And so it sheds that herbicide. It doesn't readily stick to it and absorb. So the best thing you can do with ivy is first save your trees. So you cut it as high as you can reach, the vine, and then you cut it at the base of the trunk, and you can kind of work down from the top and peel it away from the trunk, and that creates a window pane, which means you can see when it's trying to make its way back up. Like you want to have that open space that you can easily scan and go, ah, I see you, you're trying to get back. And then once you've done that and gotten it off of the tree, you want to kind of make life preserver rings around all your trees. So you work out 3 feet. That's the amount of space that it takes the ivy 1 year to grow back into. So if you can get that 3 feet, you've bought yourself a year, and then you just start working your way out from there.
There's 100 trees.
No, there's 300
It's a
trees.
huge number. So, start, you just have to start somewhere, right?
Can you just mow it continuously?
I mean,
And then put lime down? I understand that they don't do well in soil that has been mended with lime.
Well, your trees probably won't do well either, though.
Well, you wouldn't go up, you'd create that barrier, like you said, but obviously it can't, I think the roots need to go up further, but.
The tree roots are probably all connected in an established forest. So, I mean, that is, wearing the roots out of a plant is one way to do it. I don't know how accessible it is for you to actually mow it. That's the key.
They were clearly planted in straight lines, so, I mean, I suppose, but we, don't have you need a bush hog to get in there and take it down and then maintain it. It's just, and I found out no self-respecting goat will eat it either.
Yes,
I
so
thought about getting goat,
I thought
renting them
about that.
and letting them.
my husband and I used to
They don't
have
have
a business called the Eco Goats, and our goats didn't like to eat ivy on the ground. They eat it on the trees, but they wouldn't eat it on the ground.
I have, we bought a very abandoned property and I have removed acres of English ivy by watching a YouTube and figuring out how to roll it up in a log.
Yeah,
And so I've gotten so deep that I now do not have acres of English ivy. And I now can go out and take out the parts that have come back, but you have to get down really deep or you're gonna be doing it all the time.
so you have to get under it with a spade.
The guy on my YouTube said it's great if you have grandchildren, which I don't, by the way. Anyway.
Ours is so mingled with poison ivy, they'd be terrified to let the grandchildren.
I get so covered, I
Yeah.
can't tell you, and you
Not
go
one to be-
underneath, you pull it. For me, as I was telling them earlier, it's incredibly satisfying.
It looks gorgeous too.
And it looks really good, and
I'm sure it
I
does.
killed it all. It was great, it was during COVID, so I was out there.
Do you miss it? Do you miss it?
That's what I.
Yeah, so, yeah, you can pry it up with a spade and kind of roll it up like a carpet. There are a few landscapers out there who do this work, and I'd be happy to connect you with them. And it may just be that you wanna take, a quarter acre at a time and just, the thing with battling any kind of weed or invasive is if you have a large area, always start at the same place. Always, always, always. Because if you start one place and you just keep working your way and you find you turn around and you're like, oh my God, it looks like just the way it was when I started at the beginning. You just always start at the same place and keep, gradually moving forward.
Or buy a property that doesn't have any invasives on it.
Well, that would be
Or
good to know.
So, I meant to take this slide out of here, actually. Don't forget that. We're gonna talk about that in the next session. So the next practice that I wanna talk to you about is meadows. If you have a larger piece of property and you're mowing a lot of grass, this is a great alternative to that, unless you actually need that grass for a purpose. This is a drone shot of our former Chester River keeper Tim Trumbauer's property. All this area that you see used to be mowed grass. And Tim was out there, every weekend on his tractor, mowing all the grass. And his kids never went out there and played on all that grass because it was boring and hot. So one day he was like, I've had enough of this. And so he decided he was going to convert it all into meadow. So this area here, he still has some lawn for when you need lawn, because sometimes you do need lawn. And the rest of it, he put into meadow, and he mowed, as you can see, that beautiful curvilinear path through it. And guess what? His kids started going outside and playing because that was interesting. It was, a path to walk along. There were birds, there were bugs, there were, all kinds of critters that were interesting, and it was fun. And it was way less work for him. So typically when you establish a meadow, proper site preparation is key to success. And I am not talking, when I say a meadow, about what happens when you just stop mowing. Because what happens when you just stop mowing is you just get really tall grass. It's not native grass. It's, whatever grass was in your lawn, which I guarantee you wasn't native. And so that's not actually providing any habitat for anything. And it's messy, and inevitably there's going to be lots of weeds in there, lots of invasives. So, what you really want to do is kill the grass and purposefully seed in a meadow mix of different native plants, which you have complete control over what those plants are going to be. You can custom design that mix. You're working with your contractor. It takes about 3 to 5 years to get that meadow established and make sure that the meadow has fully filled in and that you're not having any bad actors hanging out in there looking to reproduce themselves all over the place. Once you have that establishment period finished, the only maintenance of that meadow is mowing it once a year, preferably like in late March, so that in the wintertime you have the beauty of all those seed heads, the birds have the benefit of all eating all those seed heads, and the insects have the benefit of overwintering in those stems. So it's a great alternative to like lots and lots of lawn that takes lots and lots of work.
How expensive is that on a per acre basis?
I am not gonna lie to you, it's expensive. But if you're paying a lawn service, I would encourage you to do, what's your payback time frame? When you're talking about paying somebody to mow your lawn every week for 6 months out of the year versus once a year. There are also some grants out there, depending on, right now, Shore Rivers is looking at putting together some different HOAs that want to create at least an acre of meadow and combining all of them into a grant application to pay for that establishment of the meadows. Because we'd like to see less HOA spaces in mowed grass that nobody ever uses, and more HOA spaces in meadows with paths that activate that space, not only for the birds and wildlife, but for the people who live there.
Plus you get a lot of enjoyment from a meadow.
Yes, they're really beautiful. And so is that grass that's in the meadow? This is, in the fall, this is grass that has started to turn.
But what kind of grasses?
I
It's
can't,
not.
I don't know.
But it's a native, probably, a
Yeah,
native
it's like a
grass.
native one season grass.
Oh,
Yeah, there's lots of different ones. There's blue stem and switchgrass and Indian grass, or there's lots of different native grasses, depending on what your soils are like and how tall you want your meadow to be, would be what grasses you select to go in there. And then also what perennials, what blooming perennials do you want to combine with that grass to create something of interest throughout the growing season.
And what if you have an area that you don't want to necessarily do turf grass, but you want something low growing? Is there an alternative?
Like a ground cover kind of thing?
Yeah.
She's gonna show you a lot of that.
Okay.
We'll talk about ground covers next week.
Okay.
So the last practice I want to talk to you about, I'm going to read you a little something that I've never been able to memorize. So what if we could build a machine that would remove pollutants from air and water, absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it for 50 to 100 years or more, filter groundwater, continually recycle pollutants into new organic mulch filters, cool our homes and communities in the summer and reduce energy consumption, would keep doing all these things without using any electricity or fossil fuels and at minimal cost to operate and maintain, and could be delivered in such a variety of colors, shapes, and sizes that nearly everyone would welcome the installation of such a machine. Yes, it's trees. Trees are the answer. So one mature tree absorbs on average 1,400 gallons of rainfall within its canopy every year. That's just what it traps in the canopy.
She wants a gold star.
See me after class. That rain then drips off the leaves and onto the ground and absorbed by its roots, which makes a huge difference for how much water is running off into your local creek or river, and it's providing all these other benefits. So trees are critical to water quality, they're critical to air quality, they're critical to our health, they're critical to our insect populations. So
Unless it's a crepe myrtle.
unless it's a crepe myrtle. So Doug Talmage, he's written a number of books, and I'm gonna bring a few of them with me next week, if you guys wanna look through. But one book that he wrote is called The Living Landscape, and in the back of this book, he has a table that has all of our native woody plants in it, and how many insects are able to use that particular species to reproduce themselves. How many, insects does it support? And the oak genus, so we have lots and lots of different types of oaks that are indigenous to our area, on average supports almost 550 species of caterpillars. And the crepe myrtle supports 0. So, having these trees are critical for so many different reasons. There are no amount of rain gardens that we can put in our landscapes, stream restoration projects we can build that take the place of our mature trees that we already have, because it takes so long to grow a tree. So if you have mature trees and they look like this, it's really important to help them, to get those vines off your trees, because what happens is when the vines grow up into the canopy of your tree, they act like a sail, and the tree's roots, the tree didn't grow and adapt itself to support that kind of weight up there in the canopy of the tree. The air is supposed to be able to move through the tree. And so what'll happen is, the vines can start to prevent the tree from being able to photosynthesize and feed itself. They like literally smother it. But then that sail effect, when we get a big windstorm coupled with lots of rain, the tree comes down because that it just can't hold up that sail. And then we lose that tree that took who knows how many decades to grow. You had a question.
It wasn't a question, but I did want to mention that we had many trees down because we had many storms after we moved in. One of them took out all 4 of our cars.
Oh.
That's a whole other story. All 4 total. But the English ivy was growing inside the trees, and you could tell that it was hollowing it out. Like you could, so that's why I'm so like, you gotta get it, not just clip it. But it was outside and then it was inside.
Right.
I hate English ivy.
Yes. I'm with you. I'm with you.
So I just wanted to mention that it's not just that, it's inside as well.
Yeah. So really important to show our trees some love. Shore Rivers is working with a number of partners right now to put together a steering committee to try and create kind of we need to come up with a name for it, but other counties have what's called weed warriors. So they work in public spaces to try and get vines off of trees. So we're looking at standing up and training a volunteer group that will be able to do that in the town of Easton.
Oh, we have a lot of that problem along the bike path.
Yes, we do. Okay, so let's plant more trees. So as was mentioned a couple times earlier, we have at Shore Rivers a program called Tree the Shore. And this is an initiative at establishing more canopy within our small town. So lots of our streets have beautiful trees, but there are lots of streets in our towns that still do not. And so we at Shore Rivers have grant funding that property owners can apply for, and we will plant a free tree for you on your property. There are some caveats. It needs to be either in town or in a more densely populated like HOA. It needs to be a tree that's in a public facing space. So we're not planting backyard trees. We're planting trees that are in your front yard where they're going to be facing the street. So we also have tree steward volunteers that help with planting trees and also doing site assessments, because it was just me doing site assessments and it's a little difficult. So we started to have some volunteers help with that. If you live in an area where our program won't be available to you, Maryland does have what's called a 5 million tree initiative. So the state of Maryland is trying to plant 5 million trees by the year 2030. And they have a Marylanders Plant Trees coupon, which would give you $25 off the purchase of a native tree.
And this weekend at Atkins, they're having a program where they'll have some more of their native plants and trees available to buy.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that. It looks really cool. The
Plant
Cafe, yeah.
Yeah, and that's true. You can get a $25 coupon. I've done it before and gotten those refunds back, so it's pretty cool.
From
Yeah.
9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Sorry, it's on my calendar.
It's on my calendar too. Let's go.
So if you're interested in signing up for a tree, you can scan this QR code or you can go to our website and sign up. Please be patient with me. My email inbox is really a sad state of affairs right now because I've been out in the field for weeks, and when I'm not in the field, I've been in meetings or doing something like this. So it's going to take me a little while to get through all those requests.
So I have 2 questions. One, can you send me a JPEG that I can put in a newsletter to help
Absolutely.
promote that?
Yes.
And secondly, living in an HOA, I'm seeing an awful lot of people who are replacing trees. And the reason they are is that when they were planted over utility lines.
Oh, and there's tall trees.
Yep,
Yeah.
and so they're running into problems with them. So if you live in an
Short
HOA,
trees.
you may have a problem like that, and if not, you may find yourself having to do a replacement and that type of thing.
What neighborhood do you live in?
Eastern Club East.
Oh, okay, Dave Perry's neighborhood. Yeah,
I
Matt and I
think
even spoke there.
yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to talk, Dave was trying to talk the, open space people into the Meadow idea.
I think, yes, I should talk to him about that.
Yes, you should. Do you mind emailing me that request, just so I don't forget?
Another one.
Yeah.
I could text it to you too. Is that
Just make sure Megan's on there, so she'll.
If it's written down, I'll get to it eventually. Okay, so with trees come leaves, right? And so leaves can be work, but they can also be viewed as a wonderful resource. Leaves are free fertilizer. There was a meme that went around on Facebook at some point that was like, leaves break down and turn into fertilizer and soil. They don't break into your house and steal your wine. So it's like, just embrace them. So what do you do with the leaves? You can ride over them with your lawnmower and turn them into mulch, which will fertilize your lawn. The best thing you can do is rake them to an area of your yard where it would be okay for them to just sit there and break down over the winter time. They will break down very quickly and compress. They won't stay as deep as you've raked them.
Somebody gave me a great idea, and that was they take their metal garbage can, they fill it up with those leaves, because this is assuming you don't have a mulcher on your mower, and then they take the weed whacker in that and mulch it all up.
Now, how many acres of leaves can you do in a day?
Well,
Yeah. It all, the technique depends on the scale that you're operating at. So if you can rake them up and leave them in a pile intact, that is like the best thing you can do. Because what's in those leaves oftentimes are next year's beneficial bugs. They've laid their eggs in there and they need that leaf duff to overwinter in. If you mulch them up, you're probably gonna pulverize some of those bugs. So best practice is to rake the leaves whole. Next best is mulch them in place. You can also mulch them and rake them into your garden beds. Again, this is free fertilizer. It's also, depending on your aesthetic, free mulch. After that, the next best thing to do would be to bag them in brown bags for pickup. Please don't put them in plastic. And then the worst thing you can do is this. Don't put them in the street where they're gonna end up in the storm drain, because A, it's gonna clog the storm drain up. B, as we now know, that storm drain is leading right to the creek. So again, nutrients on the land are a valuable resource. Nutrients in the water are pollution. So putting leaves into the water is creating all this phosphorus pollution, as well as a lot of nitrogen pollution. Same thing, lots of people, if you have kind of a naturalized backyard and then there's a ravine at the bottom of that, lots of neighborhoods are this way where you've got the little stream that goes through and the houses are kind of built on either side and you've got that natural area. And what do? You put everything down there over the hill because it's away, but then it's going in the stream. It's becoming pollution. Okay, so I talked about Doug Talame. There he is, right here. He worked with the World Wildlife Foundation to create something called the Homegrown National Park. And so this is kind of a movement that's focused on getting people to change the way they're landscaping their own individual properties and then map themselves. And his idea is that if we all did this and we linked up all of our little backyards, that we would create the largest national park in our country that would be habitat for the birds and the bugs that we want to see survive. So you can go on this website, you can map yourself if you're doing these practices already. You can get more information about native plants and these different practices. You can order a sign and stick it in your yard so your neighbors just know what the heck it is that you're doing over there. And then maybe they can get educated and find out if maybe they do the same thing. Okay, so 3 important takeaways from today. Nutrient and sediment pollution is damaging our rivers. Most of that pollution in our rivers is coming from within our watershed. So if you've ever been to one of our State of the Rivers events, which there's one tonight in St. Michael's at 5:30, the headwaters are typically the most polluted section of our river. And that's because it has the most amount of land mass draining to it in relation to the rest of the river. So there's lots of talk about the Susquehanna Dam and all the stuff that's coming out of there and how it's ruining the bay, and that's all true, but it's not necessarily ruining our rivers. We're ruining our rivers. And the best thing on this page is we can fix it. Last year at the Sassafras State of the River, our Sassafras River Keeper said something that really resonated with me, and that is that it took us over 400 years to get the level of impairment that we see in our waterways now. It took a really long time for us to degrade them to where they are. And we've been working to fix them for 50 years. But really, we've only been working hard to fix them for about 25. So we have a long way to go, but we are seeing progress. And I think the proof in the pudding there is that while things aren't necessarily getting dramatically better in terms of water quality, they're not getting worse. And our population is growing tremendously. So we're taking away a lot of these natural areas that are creating the buffers that are so important to our waterways. So the work that we're doing to fix them is helping because we're holding the line. And then at some point, we're going to start to see things get better and better. And now I'm going to give you some homework for next week. So I mentioned this Homegrown National Park website, homegrownnationalpark.org. If you go there and you click this little drop down that says Doug Tallamy, there's a Watch Doug Talks, which has some links to a few different talks that he gives. So you can see the Zoom version of his talk. And you can also click Tallamy's Hub. Oh, I'm trying to get some feedback on that. Sorry. You can also click Tallamy's Hub, and there's all kinds of information on there. You know, it's articles that he's written or podcasts that he's been on, books that he's written. And then on this website itself, there's lots of information about this subject of creating backyard habitat. So I would like to see everyone go home and check this website out and maybe watch one of his talks. I promise you won't be sorry. He's such an amazing speaker, really, really interesting and witty guy. And then, this is the last slide, I promise, guys. We're going to take action for a resilient future. So what can you do? You can plant a river-friendly yard. You can share this information with a friend, other residents in your neighborhood, most importantly, your landscaping company. So if you are working with a landscaper and maybe they aren't doing some of the things the way that you would prefer that they be done in order to have a river-friendly yard, there is a program called Chesapeake Bay Landscape Professionals. They do a certification. I'm a Chesapeake Bay landscape professional, and they have different ones for, they've got one that's for crews, the guys that are like mowing and blowing, and they've got some for design, and they've got some for installation. Shore Rivers offers full scholarships to landscapers who work on the Eastern Shore to go through this program. So if you or your neighborhood are working with a landscaper and you would like to see them become more bay friendly, advocate to that landscaper that you would like them to get this certification and that Shore Rivers will pay for it. Connect us with a favorite community organization. We really love to work collaboratively. Volunteer with Shore Rivers. We have lots of programs. I encourage you to check out our website to see all the different things that you can do to work with Shore Rivers. We've got SAB watchers. We have Swimmable Shore Rivers swim testers. We have Marylanders Grow Oysters. We have our tree stewards. We have people that volunteer with our education team. There's lots and lots of different ways you can volunteer. You can make a donation to support our work. We are a nonprofit. This is a very challenging fundraising climate. And so we are always grateful for any kind of donations that we can get, especially when they are not encumbered by, what I'm trying to think of. Unrestricted funds, yes, unrestricted funds are amazing. And finally, you can be a stubborn optimist. And so that's, I think, a really incredibly useful tool in today's climate. And that is, a stubborn optimist is somebody who, in the face of everything that's presented before you, chooses to do what you can with what you have, where you are, knowing that it will make some difference. And that is everything I have for you today.
I would also